Pat Morita, the man who would later become immortalized as Mr. Miyagi, was born in Isleton, California in 1932. His journey into Hollywood stardom was anything but smooth, and his personal story before the bright lights of fame was one of hardship, survival, and resilience.
The big guy, Jerry Weintraub, didn't want me for this. He wouldn't even consider me for a reading. Every time my name came up in the casting submittal process, he was adamant. He says, I don't want a comedian. I don't want a comic actor for this role. This is a heavyweight part. I want an actor.
Unlike the calm, all-knowing mentor he played on screen, Morita's early life was filled with obstacles that would have broken most people. Yet it was precisely these struggles that shaped his character and gave him the depth he carried into his acting career. At just 2 years old, Morita was diagnosed with spinal tuberculosis, a disease that confined him to hospitals for nearly 9 years of his childhood. Doctors doubted he would ever walk again. For much of his young life, he lived in a plaster body cast, watching the world go by from the isolation of a hospital bed. He later recalled how those years were a mixture of physical pain and emotional loneliness. Yet he also discovered in that isolation the power of imagination and humor. His ability to make nurses laugh was his first taste of how comedy could ease pain and create connections. When Morita was finally discharged from the hospital, he expected freedom, but life handed him another cruel twist. World War II had broken out, and Japanese Americans on the West Coast were forced into internment camps. Morita and his family were uprooted and imprisoned alongside thousands of others, losing their freedoms and dignity. These experiences exposed him to the harsh realities of racism and prejudice in America. For young Pat, it was another reminder that life was never going to be simple. After the war, his family tried to rebuild their lives by running a small restaurant. Morita worked there, often washing dishes or waiting tables. But he knew his spirit belonged elsewhere. Humor became his tool for survival. He could mimic voices, make clever observations, and deliver lines that brought laughter. While customers saw him as the son helping at the family restaurant, his friends began to see him as a natural entertainer. By the 1960s, Morita made the bold decision to pursue comedy full-time. It was a risky move, especially for a Japanese-American man in an industry dominated by stereotypes. He entered the nightclub circuit, performing stand-up routines filled with sharp timing, cultural commentary, and self-deprecating humor. Audiences enjoyed his style, and slowly he carved out a name for himself. But even as he found success in comedy clubs, Hollywood continued to see him as nothing more than a comic relief figure. His first big break came when he landed a recurring role on the hit TV sitcom Happy Days as Arnold Takahashi. His appearances gave him visibility, but they also reinforced the idea that he was a comedian first, not a serious actor. Hollywood typecast him, limiting his opportunities and preventing him from exploring the dramatic potential he had always carried within him. By the early 1980s, his career was stalling. The fame from Happy Days had faded, the stand-up gigs were drying up, and he found himself back in Hawaii, working small-time jobs just to keep bills paid. For many, it looked like Pat Morita's career was over, but destiny was quietly preparing him for a role that would change his life forever. When The Karate Kid entered pre-production in 1983, the filmmakers knew the story depended on the relationship between a young boy and his mentor. The role of Mr. Miyagi was central. He had to be wise, strong, but also human, carrying the scars of his past. For many in Hollywood, the obvious choice was to cast a dramatic actor with proven seriousness. Pat Morita, best known for cracking jokes, was not even on their radar. Producer Jerry Weintraub made his stance clear from the beginning. He didn't want a comedian in the role. "This is a heavyweight part," he declared. "I want an actor, not a comic." Every time Morita's name surfaced in casting discussions, Weintraub dismissed it instantly. To him, casting Pat Morita as Miyagi would be a mistake. Yet director John Avildsen saw things differently. Avildsen had built his reputation on underdog stories. His earlier work, Rocky, had proven that unconventional casting and authentic emotion could create magic. To him, it was essential to test every possible candidate, even those the producers doubted. Against Weintraub's objections, Avildsen insisted that Pat Morita be given an audition. When Morita finally walked into the audition room, he was not the polished comedian audiences remembered. His career struggles had taken their toll. He had grown a beard during his time in Hawaii, giving him a rugged, older look. This accidental transformation turned out to be a blessing. For the first time, he looked like the weathered, experienced mentor the script demanded. The audition itself was unusual. Instead of a panel of executives, Morita found John Avildsen himself operating a camera, recording everything up close. Avildsen didn't start with scripted lines. Instead, he asked Morita to talk about his life, his career, his struggles, his experiences. Morita, tired from years of rejection, spoke slowly and deliberately. His words were halting, almost broken, but they carried weight and truth. That cadence, born out of exhaustion, would later evolve into Miyagi's iconic voice. Avildsen was convinced, but the producers were not. Morita was forced to endure 5 grueling auditions. First, he had to prove that his performance wasn't a one-time fluke. Then came the chemistry test with Ralph Macchio, the young actor cast as Daniel LaRusso. The bond between student and teacher was crucial, and to everyone's surprise, the connection was immediate. Macchio leaned into Morita naturally, and their dialogue flowed with warmth and trust. It felt real, not acted. The 4th audition placed Morita in costume, complete with his beard and gi. The transformation shocked everyone in the room. He no longer resembled the sitcom comedian they saw before them, a man of experience, someone who had endured hardship and carried wisdom. Finally, the producers staged a 5th test on an empty soundstage. No sets, no props, just Morita, Macchio, and a camera. It was designed to strip away all distractions and see if Morita could truly inhabit Miyagi. What happened next silenced the skeptics. Morita didn't act, he became Miyagi. The interaction between him and Macchio was so natural, so moving, that even the producers who had doubted him began to change their minds. Still, the final word lay with Jerry Weintraub. After watching Morita's performance with Macchio, Weintraub picked up the phone. On the other end, Morita waited anxiously. Weintraub's words stunned him. "Pat, I almost made the worst mistake of my life. Congratulations, you're Miyagi." For Morita, that phone call was not just a career milestone. It was redemption. After years of being typecast and dismissed, he had finally broken through Hollywood's wall of doubt. Winning the part was only half the battle. Now, Morita had to breathe life into Miyagi in a way that would resonate with audiences and avoid the stereotypes that had long plagued Asian characters in Hollywood. He knew that if the character wasn't handled with dignity, it could easily fall into caricature. The key lay in Miyagi's voice. During his auditions, Morita's exhaustion had caused him to speak in slow, halting phrases. Director Avildsen encouraged him to develop this rhythm further, believing it reflected the reality of an immigrant learning English later in life. Morita refined it into a cadence that carried dignity, wisdom, and thoughtfulness. Instead of sounding comedic, it became poetic. Every pause felt intentional. Every phrase carried meaning. This voice transformed Miyagi into more than a mentor. It made him a cultural icon. Children imitated it, adults quoted it, and it became inseparable from the film's identity. Ralph Macchio later admitted that he was astonished by the difference between Morita's natural personality, smooth, witty, and quick, and the quiet, meditative presence he brought to Miyagi. The contrast made the performance all the more powerful. Morita also pushed for depth in Miyagi's story. One of the most critical moments was the drunk Miyagi scene, in which he mourns the loss of his wife and child during the internment years. Studio executives worried the scene would slow down the film or make audiences uncomfortable. Morita, however, insisted it stay. He knew it revealed Miyagi's humanity, showing that beneath the wisdom was a man carrying deep scars. When he performed the scene, the crew was stunned. Morita's grief was raw and authentic, drawing on his own painful memories of illness, internment, and rejection. When the cameras stopped, the set fell into silence. No one clapped, no one spoke. They simply let the weight of the performance settle. For Morita, that moment was proof that he was no longer just a comedian. He was an actor capable of profound emotional power. By the time The Karate Kid premiered in 1984, audiences were captivated. The crane kick, the wax-on lessons, and Miyagi's quiet wisdom became instant cultural phenomena. Critics praised Morita as the film's heart. He earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor, something that once seemed unimaginable for a man Hollywood had dismissed as a sitcom comic. For Pat Morita, the transformation was complete. He had gone from being the rejected comedian to becoming Mr. Miyagi, the role that not only saved his career, but also left an everlasting mark on cinema. After winning the role against all odds, Pat Morita stepped onto the set of The Karate Kid determined to prove himself every single day. For him, the struggle wasn't over once Jerry Weintraub offered the part, it was only beginning. He carried the weight of expectations and the skepticism that had nearly excluded him. Morita knew he had to transform not only for the cameras but also in the eyes of the cast and crew who still doubted whether a comedian could embody such a serious role. From the start of filming, Morita surprised everyone. He did not simply play Mr. Miyagi. He became him. Between takes, he often stayed in Miyagi's cadence, improvising small life lessons for crew members. Miyagi say, "Don't forget patience. Even when light's not working," he would joke. Or Miyagi say, "Balance important even at lunch table." What began as playful banter slowly turned into ritual. Crew members found themselves looking forward to his words, and soon they were addressing him as sensei. Perhaps the most important relationship on set was the one between Morita and Ralph Macchio. At just 22, Macchio was still finding his place in Hollywood. Fame was overwhelming and the pressure of leading a major studio film weighed heavily on him. Off-screen, Morita naturally stepped into the same mentor role he played on screen. He shared advice, cracked jokes to lighten the mood, and quietly guided Macchio through the challenges of shooting. Years later, Macchio would recall that their relationship was not scripted. It was genuine. Their trust and affection became the foundation for the film's emotional authenticity. Several scenes carried special significance for Morita. The chopstick scene, written as comic relief, was transformed by his focus. He performed it with such concentration that it became more than a gag. It revealed Miyagi's playful spirit. When Daniel unexpectedly succeeded in catching the fly, the laughter between them felt unscripted, strengthening the bond audiences adored. But no scene carried greater weight for Morita than the drunk Miyagi sequence. In it, Miyagi reveals his grief over losing his wife and child in an internment camp. Studio executives nearly cut the scene, fearing it would disrupt the tone. Morita fought passionately to keep it, arguing that it gave Miyagi humanity beyond the stereotype of a wise Asian mentor. When he performed it, his sorrow was so raw that the set fell into complete silence. Ralph Macchio later admitted he had goosebumps watching it unfold. That moment silenced the last of the skeptics and proved Morita's dramatic power. By the time the final tournament scenes were filmed, Morita had earned the respect of everyone around him. He was no longer the comedian from Happy Days. He was Sensei Miyagi, not just for Daniel LaRusso, but for the entire cast and crew. When The Karate Kid premiered in 1984, it became an instant phenomenon. Audiences around the world embraced its story of mentorship, resilience, and triumph. Children imitated the crane kick, repeated Miyagi's lessons, and quoted his lines endlessly. Adults praised the emotional depth of the film, recognizing that Miyagi was more than just a side character, he was its moral heart. Pat Morita's performance earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor, a recognition few thought possible when Weintraub initially dismissed him. For the first time, Hollywood acknowledged his dramatic ability. For Morita, the nomination was vindication after decades of being underestimated. Yet, with success came new challenges. The role of Mr. Miyagi elevated Morita's career, but it also confined him. Hollywood began to see him exclusively as Miyagi. Casting directors struggled to imagine him in other roles, despite his versatility. Offers for serious dramatic parts remained scarce, and Morita found himself repeatedly reprising Miyagi in sequels and variations of the same mentor figure. He often joked in interviews about being stuck as Miyagi forever, but behind the humor was frustration. After years of battling to prove he was more than a comedian, he now faced a new prison, typecasting as the wise Asian mentor. Beyond professional struggles, Morita faced personal battles as well. Off-screen, he wrestled with health issues and alcoholism, which strained relationships and affected his consistency in later years. Friends described him as endlessly kind and funny, but also as someone who carried private pain. The contrast between Miyagi's calm wisdom and Morita's turbulent inner life was striking. Still, he never expressed bitterness about being remembered for Miyagi. He acknowledged that very few actors ever create a character that becomes timeless. To him, being immortalized as Miyagi was far better than being forgotten. "If Miyagi is my legacy," he once said, "I can live with that." As the years passed, Pat Morita spoke more openly about his journey. In interviews before his passing in 2005, he admitted how close he came to losing the role of Miyagi. He credited John Avildsen for believing in him when no one else would. Without Avildsen's persistence, he often said there would be no Miyagi. He also reflected on how the role shaped him personally. The lessons of patience, humility, and resilience that Miyagi embodied became values he carried into his own life. "Miyagi taught me as much as I taught Daniel," he once remarked. For Morita, Miyagi was not just a character, he was a gift that helped him heal wounds from his own past. The cultural impact of the Karate Kid was far greater than anyone anticipated. Fans from across the world wrote to Morita, sharing how Miyagi's wisdom guided them through challenges. Some said his lessons helped them raise children. Others admitted they found strength in his words during moments of loss. For Morita, this feedback was more meaningful than awards or fame. It was proof that his performance had touched hearts in ways that lasted a lifetime. Even after his passing, Morita's legacy endures. The Karate Kid remains a classic, watched by new generations every year. Spin-offs like Cobra Kai keep Miyagi's spirit alive, ensuring that his lessons of balance, discipline, and kindness continue to resonate. Children still learn wax on, wax off, while adults find comfort in Miyagi's wisdom during their own struggles. In many ways, Pat Morita's journey mirrored the very film he helped bring to life. Like Daniel LaRusso, he was underestimated, doubted, and nearly rejected. And like Mr. Miyagi, he proved that resilience, humility, and strength could overcome all odds. His story is more than a Hollywood tale. It is a reminder of the human spirit's ability to endure and triumph. For Pat Morita, Mr. Miyagi was not just a role. He was redemption, validation, and legacy. And as long as audiences continue to draw strength from Miyagi's lessons, Pat Morita will never be forgotten.